our budgeting and forecasting methodology, right? We're really trying to get all of those projections.
Could I just, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I just want to ask a question about what you just specifically said. So in FY 19, the original budgeted amounts for salaries and benefits may have been higher, and funds were transferred later, so that the actual underspend was likely higher than this? Or
No, in FY 17.
17, but not in
17.
18 or 19?
Not in 18 or 19.
I think it's just a really important clarification, and that is that we haven't done it. We've been super transparent in the salary and benefits line to say, here's what we budgeted, here's what we spent, and we didn't do any transfers into contingency accounts or anywhere else where that may have been the process and procedure prior.
So if I'm tracking then, just as a, just point of clarification, so comparisons 2019 and 2018 fundamentally use a more similar method for budgeting than 2017 does to either of those other two.
That's correct.
And also 2019 and 2018 using a more similar method to what's been used for 20 and what's being used for 21 development.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's because we have a different.
You've got a new team in front of you. We just are approaching the budget slightly differently.
Yeah, and with a goal of really trying to fundamentally understand it and to be completely transparent and to do better continually. So when you look at this, when we look at our current year budget, one of the things Michelle has been absolutely spectacular at is when we got here, we weren't using our financial system to our knowledge in terms of doing any of these actual projections as we move forward. So when we look at how we're calculating salaries, what we did is for the 21 proposed budget, what Michelle did is with our budgeting system, it took people's actual salaries who were employed here in December. So not the 19 budget, not the 20 budget, but our actual salaries that we're paying people in December. And from there, the system calculated step for our employees. So this is a chart. I know these columns, and this is directly the way it comes out of the system. So I thought I would help try to explain this because I don't think it's super intuitive, and I realized that after we put it in this budget question response. So what this does is I changed, it has people's actual names and numbers and data, and I took that out, and I just changed them on the first column to say either support or teacher in terms of those categories. The pay is their pay type in the system. It helps us figure out, so that 120 pay, for example, that does tell us that person is paid over 12 months versus 110 is somebody who's paid over 10 months. So that prior rate is what is their pay rate in December, right? So it's the actual date that you pull the salary file data in December. So you can see that first support position is somebody who's actually paid on an hourly basis as compared to the second line is a teacher who's paid on an annual basis. So that prior grade is where they're currently sitting right now. So it's their salary and grade when you look at this. So you can see that first person, that what looks like an L, it's really an I-20. That's somebody who's on a paraprofessional scale. That's the scale name in the system, so that's part of that confusion. And that person right now is sitting on step 7 in December. And it's telling us that after Michelle processed this step in the system, that their pay is going to go from $20.72 an hour to next year being $21.39 an hour. They're still on the same salary scale. Their new step will be step number 8, and then the system knows their hours and all of those other components. So it's telling our projected salary for next year, in this case, is $30,318, and then it calculates what is that increase as compared to the current year, what we're paying them. So this is exactly how we calculate step for every single person we have here. And then to this, we have to apply salary-sensitive benefits. So when we look at things like the Virginia retirement system, for example, it's a percentage of pay. Right, so we have to attach that percentage for that benefit to these increased costs. It doesn't apply to things that aren't salary sensitive, like health insurance, for example. Right, health would only factor in if we were adding new employees, right, because we know what our acceptance rate is of health. So this is literally what we used in December to go through and say, so how much is STEP going to cost us? The STEP system doesn't include forecasting for positions that aren't currently here. right? And it doesn't project if somebody's vacant, which makes sense, because if we have a position that's vacant, if we hire somebody now that we're after January, they're not gonna be eligible for a step next year, right? And then when we look at calculating our turnover, I'll talk about, we're really using our salary base from here and looking at what pay do we project for people next year versus what pay do we hire somebody at.
So, Kristen, when you, there's a statement about the average, step increase would be 2.7%. So you're just looking at these projected increases and just dividing and figuring out what the average would be 2.7.
Exactly. And the system knows the salary scales are loaded in the system. So if somebody's on step 20, which is the top step, right, and there is no step 21, they end up generating on a separate report telling us that person is not going to get step for next year. So the system has already taken any of them out of the calculation. They get returned on a separate report saying 0 increase for those people. Uh-huh. Okay. So in FY18, we did have a greater variance between our budget and actual salaries than we did in the prior year, right? And I truly believe that in part, this is really due to the fact that we didn't do any adjustments. So in FY18, the interim Chief Operating Officer was here, and she made no adjustments across any categories. But then when the 19 budget was developed, what she had staff do was go back and pull every single person's actual salary, and they completely recalculated the salary base. And they started with a brand-new salary base for the development of the FY19 budget, and that was $365,000 lower than the budget for the prior year. Right, so they just kind of basically started over and recalculated salaries. So then we'll,
Just for context, that was Deirdre McLaughlin, in case, for
Yeah.
those of you that don't remember.
So then when we started the budget development process for FY20, we included a budgeted amount of savings from turnover, right? So we know that we're going to have experienced people that leave the system, right? And we're going to hire people generally that are less experienced than them when they come. So what we did is we took what were the projected salaries for the people for the next year, and then we projected how much money we were going to have. So to get to that first $185,000, what we did is we captured the turnover savings from the year before. So we had HR go back and create a chart for us that showed who was every single person who left and every single person who came in. And one of the things Michelle has been really great about using our financial system for is it has what's called position control, where you can set exactly how many positions we have, and she's been really working to clean that up, so that helps as well in terms of we don't have vacant positions that we're not going to fill, or people can't hire another position because we're truly tracking, did we have a position that was vacant, because we no longer have any other vacant positions. So from that, we calculated that turnover and budgeted that $185,000. So when you look at those 2 years together, we really did reduce our salary file by about $550,000, so about half the cost of that step, just in that 2-year period. What happens is when we look at the budget highlight chart that Dr. Noonan showed us, this chart here, this only shows the incremental change from the year before. So when you see the change for lapse on here, that's the change from the prior year. So it went from $185,000, and we basically added the other 60 to it. So those two are cumulative in the 2021 budget. And when we load them in line items, we load some in salaries and some in benefits.
I'm gonna wait for you.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were ready to ask me a question. Okay, I'll keep going. Okay. So when we look at budgeting for turnover, right, I came from a super large system, and one of the things was we had really, really clean data for an extended period of time. And they were super prescriptive, is the nice word that I'll use. So even when we looked at when stuff posted, like they have hundreds of people that do nothing but process transactions. So even the timing of things was super good. So when you were looking at forecasting stuff out and tracking stuff, you had a lot of data, and it was very clean. Right, when we started on this data with the budget adjustments and stuff, it was really hard to find multiple years of clean data that we could use to help us forecast, project, and do those things. So we really wanted to make sure that we didn't overestimate in terms of salaries. When I started at my previous job, somebody long time before me had made a mistake in adjusting salaries, by even 1%, right? And even a percent in terms of salaries is a huge amount of money. So you always try to take a cautious approach with the goal of getting better and better. So what we did is we had budgeted that 185,000. So then later, this last year, after summer was over, right, we tend to try to hire people early, but it always tends to drag out until the end of summer. We went back again and we had HR give us the same data of who is every person who left, who came in, and how much savings do we actually achieve, right? And it was slightly less than the 185,000, but really close. So we knew we could increase it some for next year, but we didn't want to increase it too much because I really only had 1 year in terms of experience in terms of people who came and left. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute in terms of how that impacts the overall thing. So we did increase it, so now it's that combined total of the 185 plus 60. All right, I don't have any more charts on that page. So when you look at that overall, right, our gaps in terms of our salaries are really kind of impacted by multiple things as we're thinking about the projection, right? The first is we don't know who's going to leave the system typically until late, right? Our teachers have to notify us, but they don't have to notify us until June, right? And then our 12-month employees can really leave at any time. So we typically don't know who's going to leave until late spring, right? So when we look at last year, just as an example, when we think of the turnover from last year, we had about 5 people retire, but our overall turnover was about 60 people in total. So it's also not easy for us to project that the people that are leaving are all going to be at the top of the scale and the people coming in are going to be at the bottom, because we're getting more turnover from people that aren't retiring, which is also really typical in terms of a school division, I believe. So then when we look at hiring, the other thing that we do here is we don't tell principals, here's your salary budget. So Sally left, and now you're going to hire another teacher to replace Sally. We don't say salary was paid X, right? So whoever you hire has to be paid X or less, right? What we tell principals is you have a teacher vacancy, so you need a new math teacher. We want you to hire the best person that you can who fits the job, right? And then our goal is overall with that hiring that we'll balance out those salaries, right? And some people we may hire will have a higher degree and more experience, or some people will have less. But it's really working to help us understand, right, how does that all impact our turnover in terms of that projection for the next year. Then lastly, the other thing that really impacts our salary budget and that variance at the end of the year is when people are on leave. So when we look at people on leave for that short-term disability, we're self-insured. So if we have somebody who has a lot of leave, right, who has a child, for example, and goes out on leave, and they go out at the beginning of the year and they have a substantial amount of leave, and they tell us they're going to use all that leave and then not come back. We're going to continue to pay them at their regular salary while they use all of their leave, and we're also going to hire behind them somebody and pay that person as well, right? With our goal being, if we know they're not coming back, we're going to hire a teacher for that whole year. So all of those pieces are really the moving parts as we look to project our salaries and benefits for the next year. So I hope that helps in terms of that question.
So I do have a bunch of questions, but I mean, it's not, I think you've explained that very well. Is now the right time to ask that question?
Mr. Ranger, I think if you've got follow-on questions on this question, feel free. This is a good time.
So you're just looking at and by the way, this is, I know we're doing our best with the data we've got, and I greatly appreciate the not having transfers out of the salary and benefits, because all that does is make it impossible to look historically at whether you budgeted well or not.
Right.
So you underspend and overspend, and then you can do it historically, and it all balances out at the bottom line. Absolutely agree. But we are carrying a regular extra balance in the salaries and benefits, as you pointed out. So it was about $1.1 million 2 years ago. Last year, it was about $630,000. And based on the forecast, because I just looked at it when you went through the report for this year, it's actually gone up. So it looks like we're going to underspend by about $660,000.
Yes, our salaries look like what we're projecting is going to be less, but benefits are up.
Right,
as
but the
compared to
sum
right now.
total is more. We are underspending by more this year than last year. So the question is really, from where does that come?
Mm-hmm.
One question I've got is, I understand, I think, exactly what you're doing with the the budgeting for the cost of a step increase and a COLA, which is to do it on an individual by individual basis and then add them all together as you talked about.